Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Download, where we bring you discussion analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today is Wednesday, May 10th, 2023. I'm Bradley Eli, here with my two co-hosts, Simon Rafe, Kyle Colby. And joining us today is a guest host, Nick Wiley. Hello, Nick.
Hey, Brad.
Persecution, something we talk about a lot as Catholics, and it happens to many Catholics around the world, particularly in the Islamic countries and socialist countries. But it also seems like Catholics in Western countries are already experiencing what you might call soft persecution. Earlier this month, 19 state attorneys general said JP Morgan Chase Bank is canceling customers over their, quote, their religious or political affiliation. Okay, to start things off today, we'll be having a talk with a special guest, James Mon, about this soft persecution in the banking industry. Hello, James.
How are you, Brad? Great to be here, you guys. Thank you again.
Yeah, nice to have you on. We had you on once before already. Can you, for our viewers out there, just give them a, 1-2 line, curriculum vitae?
Oh, sure. Well, anyway, to start off with, I don't think I mentioned this last time, but I'm a cradle Catholic and have been practicing my whole life. I go to weekly mass a couple times more than that. Rosary, big part of my life, and confession and all the things that go with that. In terms of my relevance here today, my last position was for 5 years I ran the government and agency bond desk for a large regional dealer bank. So I'm kind of used to reading the tea leaves, as it were.
So you've been in the financial industry for something like 30 years now?
Yeah, almost 30 years, correct. Right.
Okay. And you're semi-retired, we might say, right now?
Yeah, semi-retired. Right now I run a finance company doing a lot of various structured finance deals and that kind of thing.
Well, what that means to me is that you're able to speak freely about things without worrying to be about being canceled yourself. Last time on the Download, you were worried a little bit about the woke banking culture, especially with the rollout of the CBDC, that central bank digital currency coming in July would be a microscopic tool for government, big corporate, financial entities to look at your bank accounts and find out everything you're affiliated with or into. Since that download that you were on, what stories do you have, such as this AG story here, 19 AGs saying this cancellation culture is alive and well already in the banking industry and we're worried about it. What about that story and others has you even more concerned perhaps about this possibility of woke banks starting to cancel other customers on a rapid scale?
Sure, absolutely. Appreciate the question, and it's very relevant. Well, for starters, last time I was on, we did touch upon these things, but actually, unfortunately, my opinion is even more galvanized now. There's three things that really are, I would say, are a cause for concern right now. The first one we're going to go over is JP Morgan. I want to talk about them in a second. And there's also the concept of defaulting on our debt and central bank digital currency. But first, let's talk about JP Morgan. I want to get this quote right. So JP Morgan effectively has, hang on one second, I want to get this quote right. Effectively, they are requesting, they've basically canceled clients all over the place because they don't agree with the politics of JP Morgan, or they're taking offense to the political affiliations individuals and businesses have. Now, 19 attorney generals from the states joined in a letter to Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan and basically said this is illegal, you can't do this, and effectively, which is actually, this is a very, very positive sign. But I think the key thing here, and this is really interesting to me, is the wording of the letter, right? The wording of the letter was, political affiliations, right? Now, JP Morgan has been touted publicly and bragged about this, that they have a score of 100% on the Human Rights Campaign 2012 Corporate Quality Index. Now, this is really worth considering. The Corporate Quality Index is exactly aligned with all the stuff we're hearing about with woke, green, DEI scores, right? All that thing. So that's what they're bragging about. What they're not bragging about is they scored an abysmal 13% on these, the standard business index, which are things like, fair business practices and things like that. But all over the place, J.P. Morgan, there's no way they can come out of this looking well. But it speaks to a broader problem, right? It speaks to the broader problem that, as I think you mentioned this earlier, but in 1980, there were 14,000 banks in the United States. Today, there are 4,000 banks in the United States. Well, what does that mean? Obviously, the industry is going through an incredible contraction. And, I think there's a lot of people would think, they're really taking the long game on this. So we're going to talk a little bit about central bank digital currency. But one of the things is central bank digital currency completely replaces the banks, right? So I think that one of the things J.P. Morgan is sort of fighting for position for is there will be some banks around, at least on a on a surface level, to give the impression that we have a free economy. But they're kind of, jockeying for position, to be one of those mega banks. One last point before I hand it back over, but in the course of, I was researching a couple of things before I came on today. Jeffrey Epstein, right? He was very interesting. The Attorney General for the U.S. Virgin Islands is pressing charges against J.P. Morgan because of RICO laws. They were ignoring the red flags that clearly J.P. Morgan, rather Jeffrey Epstein, was involved in. Do you need any more sort of additional evidence to prove that our central planning overlords are in bed with certain people? He got away with it. And even what they published publicly was heavily redacted.
So, I have a few more questions. I had to let Simon jump in here, but it's interesting that they would not cancel someone like Jeffrey Epstein, yet they would be canceling other people just for their straight-up religious and political affiliation. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, James, last time you were here, you and I chatted, of course, about William Devane and the fact that he's always saying, buy gold, and you kind of agreed with him. You actually said, people should buy gold, but obviously people can't keep all of their money in gold, and people are going to be somewhat nervous about obviously putting it in the big banks like J.P. Morgan Chase. What would you say to the suggestion of keeping your money in a much smaller, more local bank, or even something like a Catholic credit union? Is that a good idea, or does it just seem like a good idea on paper?
Well, I think that we have to take a step back and look at the broader issue. The intention of central bank digital currency is to replace cash and really have oversight over the entire economy. So your initial instinct on that was probably very correct. Go to for example, a Catholic credit union or something like that. But here's the reality, guys, and I hate to say it. The entire exercise here is to control the currency. And that means that they really wish to, and this is there's no question about it. You read the information they put out. They're putting a spin on it. But I think in the short term, you keep an eye on possibly going to smaller institutions because they're still FDIC guaranteed up to a certain amount of money, $250,000. But the reality is that they're trying to institute central bank digital currency. And then you're just at some point, because it's going to take a while. So that's the point. It's going to take a while to actually implement the necessity of, the necessity of what goes on with central bank digital currency. It's going to take a while to do that. In fact, some people are opining and weighing in at, say, 5 years. Yeah. But in the short term, right? In the short term, go to a smaller institution, particularly one you have a relationship with. And I also would really underline, I think it's a great idea to take 10% of your portfolio and put it in physical precious metals. Yeah, you mentioned that before. So yes, just like William Devane and you, both of you can't be wrong. You can feel it. You can feel it. We got some heat on that in the comments, and I retract none of it. I think it's great. It's absolutely it's great idea.
So James, the whole idea of banks canceling people, I think there's a term for it now. It's called debanking. And we've seen this with several different individuals, several different organizations, all of them either pro-life or conservative or, whatever it is, or, pro-Christianity or whatever. So it seems like what you're saying that is the big picture, that, what the left wants to see at a meta level is happening sort of on an individual level with these certain banks canceling people, but eventually it's going to be the government really doing the cancelization if you offend them because of some political or religious belief.
I could not agree with you more. You said something very interesting. It's precisely how they're handling that with freedom of expression right now. The government doesn't actually do it. If you follow my logic, what they do is they farm it out to social media, the mainstream media outlets. They cancel people who speak. So again, what they'll probably, and how they'll probably institute this is, again, with players like JP Morgan, they don't need them, but they need them. And the reason they need them is to institute policies, and they can say things like, hey, that's not us, we're not doing this, this is corporate policy. And a word to conservatives out there, because I have a lot of, in the course of my travels, I've spoken to a lot of conservatives. They're like, whatever company can do whatever they want. Well, really? That sort of attitude, and you can do what you want, I can do what I want. Well, that sort of attitude comes back to bite you, because that's exactly what we're seeing right now in terms of freedom of speech, and it's leaking over into banking.
James, one quick, it's in the news right now.
Sure.
Beijing Biden and Rhino Senate Speaker McCarthy are sitting at the table, and they just can't stay there at loggerheads. One wants to cut spending, the other one wants to keep spending. And Yellen, Treasury Secretary, is saying, well, you guys got till June. Now, it's always been political theater. It's never happened before, this whole thing. But Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, is saying, we could default as early as June. But that's kind of where the reporting stops. It's the meteorologist that says, hey, guys, there's a 50% chance an F5 tornado is going to hit this trailer park. Oh, and on to other news. Could you just briefly talk about what that would do to a rapid consolidation in banking and why? And then the only game in town type mega bank, left with the CBDC tool coming just in July, coincidentally. We're not saying there's a good default coming. Yellen is saying there's a possibility in June. Can you just say, if there was some reason, what would that do to the industry?
Brad, I think you framed that perfectly. In the first place, when you talk about what really is going on, the chairman of the Federal Reserve said we could default as early as June, right? And then suspiciously, and we're not saying anything other than the fact that, look, given the fact that the current administration seems to be doing things for maximum damage, the energy policy is just one example. Nothing surprises me. But that being said, what if the worst were to occur? And it's interesting because no one's asking this question because they always do it. But even Biden himself said, well, so what? We default on the debt. It's not the end of the world, right? It is the end of the world. It is catastrophic. And here is why. In the first place, if we default on the debt, the reason we can institute and rather issue all of this debt is because of the, quote, full faith and credit of the United States government. Well, now the credit has been compromised of that full faith and credit, number one. So the marketplace of which we, and I'm going to call that the bond marketplace, of which we, this is precisely how we fund our lives here in the United States, now will want a higher premium to put their money into U.S. bonds, or basically lend money to the United States. They're not going to take 4% anymore. And literally, if that were to happen, you're talking about catastrophic rise in rates, right? Overnight, right? A huge disruption to the financial markets, the bond markets. Now, what does that mean to the average Joe and Jane? Well, the average Joe and Jane, first of all, you have children who want to buy a house. Well, you can forget that. In 1980, when Volcker was in, I think interest rates for homes got up to 21% or something like that, right? Forget it. I think it would blow right past that. So you've got that going on. Now, you want to buy a car? Interest rates go through the roof. Credit card debt, go through the roof. Any major purchase, and we are an economy that is built on the capital markets. It is an absolute seizure of the engine, right? It is a major, major problem if, in fact, that were to happen. Now, I ask you're all reasonable people, what if that were to, if that were to happen, what would happen? Well, the reality is, it's not implausible to say, hey, there's a chance that they may use such things to institute, I don't know, digital currency.
Okay, so I guess what you were saying was it was unthinkable that there would be $80 billion of military-grade equipment left in the desert. And
there you go. Yeah.
It's unthinkable that you'd have an open border. It's unthinkable that you would cancel the XL pipeline or own drilling. It's unthinkable that the policies come, they would come after your gas stoves or your washers. So If that be the case, if they want to do the unthinkable and they're not touched by the policies, that something like this could happen. We're certainly not warmongering or fear-mongering there, but I just wanted the what if. The long bond market would blow up where banks store their money. A lot of banks would consolidate. Bigger banks would become bigger. Smaller banks would go away. It's the only game in town. You can't go and find an unwoke corporation. Last question.
Could I go into that point very briefly? You brought something up very quickly.
Okay,
The part about interest rates rising, and then all of a sudden, all this consolidation of other banks. That goes back to my earlier point.
Yeah.
Because all these banks hold bonds, they lose value. Go ahead, Brett. Sorry.
So one last take before we let you go, because this is what we're going to be talking about here. This idea of soft persecution being canceled. What's your take on soft persecution? You as a Catholic. And we're not necessarily saying buy more gold, put beans away.
Sure. We're
talking about emotional, psychological, spiritual. What could you tell our audience there?
Great questions. It's the best one today. Well, I don't think it's soft persecution right now. I think it's hard persecution. I think anybody who subscribes to really being an ardent Catholic is on the radar. They're on the enemy list. Well, what does one do? Listen, first of all, put on the armor of God. That's what this is. That's what this is all about. There's nothing they can do to us that isn't in God's plan. Always remember that. Point number two: in the event of a societal disruption, make sure think things through. Make sure you have rosaries at the house, spiritual reading, because you can't really necessarily count on the internet. Make sure you have food and water, that sort of thing. Get firearm training. But all of these things are just basic prepper items. But most importantly, understand this is God's plan. And we have to, sort of go through. We were put on this earth exactly for this moment, exactly at this time, and so it's imperative to really understand that this is when our Catholic faith really rises to the top. So my answer would be put on the armor of God.
Okay, thank you for chatting with us, James. Keep in touch, and we'll see you another time here on the Download, I'm sure.
Great, thanks for having me, guys.
In terms of spiritual things, what are some ways to be strong in the face of what I would still call soft persecution, because they haven't killed anybody yet? Jesus said, "You have not resisted yet unto blood." I know, but I gave my money away.
Well,
I canceled my bank account.
I think, if you're going to talk about hard and soft persecution, you're going to come along and you say, well, it's not hard until you're dead.
Right.
I would say, all right, let's give the example of the Holodomor carried out by Stalin against the Ukrainians.
Right, that's hard.
Okay, that was hard. He didn't go in and kill a lot of people. He didn't send in the Red Army so much to do it. He just starved them. Mao Zedong starved people to death in the Great Leap Forward in the Cultural Revolution.
It's kind of like same things going on here. You just start withdrawing resources.
Right. I mean, if you come along and you say, okay, you can no longer have money. If you no longer have money, which is your standardized trading instrument in order to obtain the things that you absolutely positively need. You need for shelter, you need it for heat, you need it for food, you need it for water. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy, those are really, really low down on the pyramid of needs, guys. If you do not have the means to access them, you're dead. I mean, at that point, it's sure. You want to talk about soft persecution, as in, okay, we've kind of taken away your Twitter account, or, we've given you social probing. Fine, that's soft. You come along and you say, oh, I'm sorry, you don't have access to money. You cannot buy or sell unless we agree, unless you have some kind of agreed upon. I'm sure I've read that somewhere. But you say you can't buy and sell and trade? That's hard.
I would like
That's as hard as it gets.
Throw into here, too, because people are like, well, those are what-if scenarios. Well, let's go back to 2020. It was not a what-if scenario. We were protected here because we're a small little business. Everybody's, common sense and all. But I know so many people who it was either jab or job, jab or job. That was it. That was a real choice they had to make. And it was, some of them was for moral conviction. Some of them was for medical, pregnant mothers and stuff. And I'm not saying which way it should have fallen on anybody. All I'm saying was there was a choice, and they were not prepared to make the choice and they had to say, okay, I will lose my job. And you're talking about, okay, I don't have a lot of money in my bank account, so if I don't keep putting that stream in, well, you just canceled my job. And in that market, when everything was falling, you don't just go knock on somebody else's door and say, oh, I'd like to hire you tomorrow. So this has come to America, not to, well, you might debate whether it's a socialist country or not. But it came, it's here, and it gained speed since 2020 with the government, Biden, big red behind him, saying, we're losing our patience with you people. That was an eerie talk he gave. So don't expect the government to come to your rescue on this. They're actually kind of putting the fire underneath the people to do it.
Yeah, and I think that, the only people who get to call it a soft persecution are, one, people who have set themselves up well, or two, people who are going along with a lot of things. It's hard persecution if you're living in the matrix of the world. Go anywhere and say that marriage is only between a man and a woman, or stand up for any real rights that are being gone against, and there is heavy persecution. The only way is things like this, places where everyone is of common mindset, or if you own your own small business where you're able to dictate and you're not fireable by anyone else, where your means are pretty much provided for by yourself. All of those things, those are the only people who can possibly have soft persecution. Everyone else, if you're standing up at all, that's why a lot of people have conformed in different ways in order to only be suffering a soft persecution. But yeah, like you're saying, it's become so hard for almost everyone to just live, basically, to be able to go anywhere and do anything without having to make these major decisions. It's hard. Just most people, I'm sure, don't even get to go a lot of places they'd like to go or do things. Heck, I don't like eating restaurant food. I'd rather cook for myself. But why would I go to a restaurant when I'm going to spend way more money for way less portions for food that probably isn't as good as what I or someone else can cook? But it's almost not even an option to me to just regularly do that, just because everything keeps compounding and compounding and compounding. So yeah, the persecution is everywhere in every facet, but it's only soft if you've set yourself up well. For everyone else, if you're not experiencing hard persecution, for the majority of people, it's because you're doing something wrong.
And it's, Brad talks about the people who say, oh, these are just what-if scenarios, right? But it wasn't a what-if for the Canadian truckers during their convoy. It was absolutely not a what-if. It's amazing that the Canadian government could step in and freeze these guys' bank accounts. That's unprecedented, that's unheard of, and it's just something that happened a couple years ago and everyone moves on. But no, that should really scare the heck out of you.
Yeah, and this show here, I have to continually bring it back. It's not about fear-mongering. It's about a sober look at where we're at right now and doing a self-inventory. Am I still just watching Wheel of Fortune at night and eating a bag of Doritos before I go to bed? Or are you actually taking a sober look at the things that are coming? That thing about J.P. Morgan Chase was 19 AGs saying you're doing this and this is wrong, it's illegal, stop doing this. I
want to know on what grounds it is illegal, just as a matter of interest. Are banks common carriers? I don't know if they are. Is a bank not allowed to cancel your bank account if you're doing something they don't like? I don't know if it is illegal.
And that's why no one's going to call it illegal at the top. And that's why this consolidation is even worse. I don't like my bank. They're canceling me. Fine, I'll take my money and go elsewhere. What if there's no elsewhere to go? When James talks about 14,000 down to 4,000, and we're rapidly escalating. If we'd have talked a little bit longer, he'd talk about how the banks had zero liquidity or fractional banking was supposed to be 10% in the bank. In 2020, the government said you don't have to have any in the bank. And then when all of their money is tied up in the derivatives markets, which are all up in the air, and any bank gets a run on their stock. We used to think of a run on a bank, hey, give me my paper money, my little deposits. No, we're talking about multi-millionaire people saying, I want to cash out my stock right now. And they're like, I'm sorry, you invested this, I don't have the money. Well, then the Federal Reserve comes in and says, that's exactly how you go belly up overnight.
Well,
These banks like Silicon Valley Bank, Republic Bank, we're fine one day, and the next day the Federal Reserve is handing it to J.P. Morgan Chase on a platter saying you're getting this on pennies on a dollar, you're welcome.
And I mean, one of the biggest things is that they've created essential services that you can't possibly live without, and then they just dictate the terms to you. Because, I mean, so with the whole, we're going to electric cars, and so that you've created, a world has been created in which you basically cannot do anything without a car, and then they're going to dictate to you, you know what, now you have to buy an electric car. And so they've made it to where they are the producer of everything, and you have to go with what their product is. And that's what James was talking about so well. It's like, well, the whole American ideal of freedom and all is that like all these companies and stuff, they can just do whatever they want because it's their freedom. Well, can they? Can they morally do that? Like, is that a thing? Like, your regular, like, good-loving American patriot or whatever doesn't have an answer for that, because it's their freedom. They can do whatever they want. I can make I can make the prices. You don't have to buy it. Blah 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 blah. All that stuff. But when you take that to its end, this is what you get.
Well, I think what you end up with is you end up with this notion. There's a couple of things you're touching on there with freedom within the American experiment. The first one is looking at that notion of capitalist freedom. Is that, okay, I've got a bunch of companies, and I've got a load of different companies, and they're all essentially making the same kind of good or service, and it's like, okay, the market will decide, and absolutely they will. If you build a better mousetrap, people will buy the best mousetrap. That's the whole thing. If you've got people who are making a very expensive mousetrap, but it's real good, okay, the rich people may buy the real good mousetrap because they have the money to spend, and there's room in the market for a more inexpensive mousetrap. And in a completely free capitalist society, that works absolutely wonderfully. One of the problems, there are multiple, but one of the problems is when you come in and you get questions of regulation. And I think, lots of people have discussed this issue of over-regulation of industries, where the freedom of businesses to make a product that has not been, it has been curtailed. The other one, of course, is you can get predatory capitalism, not popular to discuss perhaps with our audience, but I'm going to go there. You can get predatory capitalism where you get things like monopolies, where you get things like we're making a product and we are exploiting our workers, or we are exploiting the resources of the natural world to do it. But the other one is, you're talking about the average freedom-loving American. Yeah, he's a freedom-loving American. He doesn't love God. So he's got this idea of freedom. Well, my freedom is I can do whatever I like. If I want to have illicit sex, I can have illicit sex. If I want to be going around and cheating my neighbor, I can be cheating my neighbor. If my next door neighbor wants to be mutilating himself and saying that he's a girl and getting a sponsorship with Bud Light, well, he can do that. It's not affecting me. That's him. You know what? Yes, it is affecting you because it's affecting the entire structure of society in which you have to live.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about. Is the people that are like the individualist who I am moral myself. I will act uprightly, but I have nothing to say for the other person because it's their freedom, it's their liberty.
And in most cases, those people are not actually moral. What it is it basically like, I'm not Hitler, which is, as you may have heard, a pretty low bar.
And they're also, too, non-confrontational. They want to say, well, I can do all the things that I need to do to be a so-called good person, but I'm not going to call anyone else out to hold them to that. So they're going to hold this kind of libertarian view of, you do what you want over here, as long as it doesn't affect me, I'm going to be a good person, I have my own values. But it doesn't translate to the rest of society.
You say, well, I don't know if it's illegal or not. Well, 19 states said it was illegal what they did. But I don't know if they really care. Yeah. When you have all the money in the world to drag a court case out forever, and you already have the attorneys tethered in your stable. So the fact is, we're here, and our viewers are here, and we want to give a word to them on how they need to get their brain around this. A, be an ostrich and deny it all. Just stick your head in the sand. B, run away in a dither or just start, emoting all over the place. Probably not the most successful thing. Or maybe C, take on the Christ mentality, right? Of the fact that you were either born for combat, you were born a Christian, you bear the name, you got to bear the cross. This ties into exactly what you said, when my neighbor's doing this, but it's not affecting me. Well, now it does. In divine providence, our country has sunk so low Just like in the Old Testament with the Israel sins, they were the people of God. They have to be corrected because they are the people of God. We were a Christian nation. How Christian, you could always debate that. But the fact is we were considered a Christian nation. Our founding fathers would think, Judeo-Christian ethics at least should carry sway in the public square. And the fact is our country now needs to go through this. And there it does affect everyone. What my neighbor does by abortions, and this one's allowing his kids to have genital mutilation, and this is happening all over around the country. And now it does affect me because now, not that I don't have my own problems. I mean, everybody has their own. But the fact is, now it does affect, and we're all paying. And isn't that a Christian thing? The innocent
pay the price for the guilty.
Pay for the guilty.
Yeah.
You pointed out that we do live in a post-Christian society, so it's no surprise that we should expect persecution. I don't think anyone, I mean, sticking your head in the sand and pretending like it's not going to happen, it's foolish, because we read about that in Scripture. The just man will face trials in this life, so expect it. We live in a secular society all around. It's the culture, it's the media. We even face persecution, from our own family sometimes. Those who don't believe the way we believe. So it might even happen within our own, households or Christmas dinners or something like that.
Yeah.
Here's a spiritual tool, and it's called redemptive suffering. For everyone out there, no pain, no
pain, no gain.
No physical pain, no spiritual gain. If it's offered as a spiritual sacrifice, pleasing and acceptable to God, as St. Peter would say in the second letter. You're in these times, it's going to be difficult, this is happening. If you get the right orientation on what's going on right now and you're understanding it from God's point of view, this is the only way we can help this country get better. The same old medicine, famine, plague, and war, okay? That's always been the Old Testament, famine, plague, and war, and Israel gets better. The only way, that's the and it's not a God, a vengeful God saying, I'm going to do this. It's just giving you what you have freely chosen in this lifetime.
It's the consequences of the actions. And I think I would kind of go back, like earlier, this whole discussion of like America as a Christian nation. Now, you and I have discussed this, Brad, and we disagreed on it. America is not and never was a Christian nation. America was and is and always has been a post-Christian nation. It was founded on Enlightenment principles, which is a rejection of Christian principles. America is not unique in being a post-Christian nation, but I think there's been this veneer of Christianity because most people in America, most Americans have been possibly Christian. But what have they been? They've been Protestant Christian in the main. The anti-Catholicism is the last acceptable prejudice in the United States. That authentic Catholicism is persecuted even by Catholics within the United States. For example, we talk about, we would always talk about these politicians, Joe Biden, etc. He's just the poster boy for it right now. A Catholic persecuting Catholic principles. Catholicism is authentic Christianity. If a country's very principles are persecuting authentic Christianity, in no way can the country truly be said to be Christian. We've had this idea that, yes, most Americans were nominally Christian, but as we said, they've discarded those ideals, if indeed they ever had them. What we have is this scenario where this constant freedom and license, and not freedom to worship God, but the license to reject him as what's been embraced as the American experiment of freedom, that has caused these problems. The way to get back to it is to go back to the idea of when the Christians were existing in a pre-Christian society, in a non-Christian society, in pagan Rome, in Israel during the first century, where what you are is you are in the world, but you are not of the world. You are sojourners in the world, and you are making sure, as you said, Brad, you're not just going home watching Wheel of Fortune, eating your Doritos. No, go home, say your prayers, read your Bible, read your spiritual reading, make sure you're educating your children, live that life so you have the spiritual fortitude yourself to say, okay, the country is post-Christian, but as for me and my house, we shall serve the Lord.
Yeah, and to me, the scariest thing in the world is to become holy. It's super scary. No one wants to do it. There's a lot of times I don't want to do it. It's the scariest thing because, so there's a few different Father Ribberger talks to go between, but there's one where he's talking about when God starts to love you, like to bring you closer into holiness, he makes your life suck. And so that's the first thing that's going to happen. People don't want that suck. It's the whole thing. Everybody want to be strong. Nobody want to lift the weights. It's that whole same mentality of you want to get there, but there's this obvious path that's been laid out by every saint from time innumerable that you only want to intellectually take. And so you want this without the real suffering that is required every time someone is to become holy. Everyone wants a glorious deathbed confession to get them into heaven. That's what we want. We don't want the actual day-in grind of holiness. And so what is the biggest step in there that is the scariest is detachment. And so there's another video that Father Ribberger talks about very well. We're talking about end times and all. Where he's basically laying out, look, even if you're a parent, you got to be detached from your kids. You have to be detached from everything there is because one, the devil can use anything against you. And two, God can call, everything is a gift from God given to you for whatever time God has it given to you. And then he wants it back. Because it's probably, it's either going to be for someone else's glory, it's for his own glory, it's whatever. But everything is just given to you for a time in which it should, in fact, make you holier. And then that thing, because it is not God, has to eventually leave. No matter what it is, it has to go at some point. No matter if it's a person, a thing, whatever, because it's meant for you to help draw to. If it's a person, you're supposed to be drawing them to God. They should be drawing you to God. But all of those things, they pass because they are not Him.
Yeah, they are not Him. It's of course that is the message in the book of Job. You know, obviously, so Job has got this great life. You know, everything's going great for Job. You know, no central bank digital currency for Job. He's got flocks and he's got land and everything. And then of course everything goes to.
Pieces.
Pieces, yes, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, so Job has a terrible time of it. And of course, Job's reaction is beautifully summed up by, the Lord giveth and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And it's so wonderful because that reaction is, of course, just like pure detachment. I mean, it's like, okay, if we could be like 1/10 of Job, we would all be laughing. But again, also Lewis, one of my favorite authors, not Catholic, unfortunately, many reasons for that, but not Catholic, pray for him. But C.S. Lewis, in the Screwtape Letters, is talking about this idea of detachment. He talks about it with regard to time. So he says that and speaking of Screwtape the demon, and I won't do the voice because I'll end up sounding like Brad after a while. But Screwtape the demon, people are going to ask me about the voice. I'll do it later. Screwtape the demon says you have to teach the patient, the one that you're tempting, you have to teach the patient the idea that he begins each day in possession of 24 hours, and they are his by right. And then it is a great and terrible tax that he has to give up to his employer, to his religious observances, to just to his family, to this and that. These are all taxes on something that is his. And Screwtape says, well, it's ridiculous. The notion, you just got to keep his mind away from thinking about it, because if he thought about it for a second, he would realize how ridiculous it is. Time, you cannot make a single moment of it. You cannot bring more of it to you. It just comes to you as pure gift. And that's the same for everything. Everything has come to us for pure gift. Even that which we have made and earned ourselves, we made it and earned it with things that we had. It's like the old joke. The scientist says to God, God, we no longer need you, for I have worked out how to make man from the dust of the earth. And God goes, okay. And the scientist bends down and picks up some dust, and God goes, no. Get your own dirt.
No, I love that one. Yeah, exactly. And that's, I mean, to me, it's the ending of Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus is basically describing to not worry about anything. Tomorrow is going to handle itself. Worry about today. There are so many things in the everyday that build up to the life of holiness and the life that you're supposed to live. If all you did was just focus on being holy today, because I tell people all the time, holiness doesn't happen tomorrow. If you don't do it today, it's never going to happen. And so if you're not doing it right now, then everything works itself out if you just do that every day. And so it starts off with this whole thing of don't be anxious. And so what are things that make you anxious? The things that make you anxious are not following God's will, and then also not not preparing yourself for the little things you need to know every day. It's like if you're not, of course it's anxiety driven when you're not refining the skills in your life that you need to do anything. Like that's the whole thing. We talk about firearms training, we talk about prepping and all that stuff. Those take away anxiety because those are human skills that can be applied in like every scenario of life. And so you're just basically taking yourself away from different things of what it means to be like a man. Whenever you're not focusing on some of those, it's not any one in particular, but these are little things that just like make you that are masculine traits that if you don't have those, of course you're anxious. And so if you're not focusing on, okay, what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to be a man or a woman? And what am I doing every day that are just simple things that are always God's will? Then that's where you take away the anxiety when you just do those things, and everything else just usually falls into place.
Part of taking away your anxiety is getting control of the things that you have control over. Now, there's an extreme with that. People are control freaks, and then you sort of almost want to become your own God in that sense. That's not what we're talking about, but you need to have that, it's like a measured sense of control. It's in the old serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, which is a lot, the courage to change the things I can, which is probably very little, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that's really the key when it comes to this. But we talk about being spiritually prepared for persecution, and it always reminds me of our Lord talking about the parable of the house built on different foundations, the house built upon sand, but then we have the house built upon the stone foundation. So when the waves come and the winds buffet the house and all that, it will not fall because it's built on that foundation, which is Christ himself.
Yeah, I would think that things are going to get a lot simpler for people. Right now, the big question is your social calendar. What am I got to do today? What am I going to do tomorrow? I got all this social media time I got to get in. I got to watch all these movies. I got to do this and jet set lifestyle and all that. What if all those distractions are kind of taken off the table? And then things get a lot more simple. And this is the thing that people, I'd like them to take this away, is when things do get simple, don't panic. It's actually probably a good thing. When all those distractions and all those things are taken, I don't have time to pray my rosary, I'm too busy. Well, now you may have time.
You have time to pray your rosary, yes.
And you have time for that spiritual reading because the internet's not working and you can't pay your bills, whatever those things are. This idea that trusting in God and being focused there, it needs to kind of start now, so when some of these things are being taken away, you don't see them as an imposition on your life. You don't see them as something that's catastrophic. You see them actually as, well, thank you, God. You just made things a little more simpler for me.
There's actually a wonderful thing in, again, Lewis, the Screwtape Letters, on that one where the patient is horribly, distracted and anxious because the Blitz is going on. It's set during World War II. And the Blitz is going on, and he's desperately doing work, to deal with the fires and deal with all of this sort of stuff. And Wormwood is incredibly excited about the fact that the patient is so dithering around and da-da-da-da-da. And Screwtape is like, you don't get it. Right now, if he died, he would be lost to us because he is so taken up with his work, this practical work of, trying to help people and putting out the fires and, digging people out of the rubble and everything else that they were doing in the Blitz when the Luftwaffe was coming and bombing. It's like he's so taken up with his work, he doesn't have time for all of the things that were his distractions. You don't get it. He's living that human life. He's doing those things that are human. And that's the thing I think that is going to come to people, that it's going to be like, okay, your social calendar is going to disappear because you're going to be put to the wall. You're going to be put to the wall and you're going to have to make these decisions about what to do. And they're going to be very practical decisions. And you won't have the time and the luxury for all your frippering around at the edges. You're going to have to concentrate on what do I need to do as a human being to survive, and part of that will be spiritual.
Yeah, I hope that the takeaway for the audience here is get your spiritual moxie up, get your spiritual game on, have this insight here to have that spiritual fortitude, which you don't get when you're sitting there watching Wheel of Fortune, eating a bag of Doritos, and have a care or less in the world. You need to start that now because things could get even more real, as they did for people in 2020 when there was no job, no jab. well, this reality is coming, and you need to get your game on now.
With your attitude, Brad, we are never going to get that sponsorship from Doritos, and Pat Sajak is not coming on to be on.
I like Doritos, by the way, but
The biggest thing is that trust in God, which only makes sense whenever you actually love him and believe that he's the God of the universe. Because there are so many things that it's just like secularly are inconceivable as to like, why would I go that far in trust? It's like, if we're all just going to lose our jobs because of the jab and all that stuff, then like, oh crap, we gotta do it. And there's just overwhelming trust. That's even then, like, we act like that's the end of the world. It's kind of pathetic that is the end of the world in our mindset of like, that was the worst case scenario possible. In all of it, it should be joy, because it's God giving us the opportunity to grow in holiness, but also it's part of the plan. If you actually believe there's a God of the universe who has a plan of salvation, who everything is for the good, for those who are of goodwill, who cooperate with it, there is nothing that can happen to you that you should not be able to you should not, find some level of joy in it. There is the whole blessed are the meek, blessed are those who mourn, all that. Like, yes, the Beatitudes.
Those who are persecuted.
Yeah, the Beatitudes are very real, but all of those things are meant to strengthen and not to detract from faith. If anything that detracts you from your faith is not a problem, it's not God's problem, it's a problem within yourself that right now you're supposed to get rid of, because that's why the detachment is so real. That's why the saints talk about doing these things that just suck. That's why they put themselves through these things that suck. It's not for those things themselves. It's for those times mentally when I got to be sharper. For those
military does it, sports.
Yeah, that's so David Goggins, one of the just coolest secular dudes, who's just like mentally the toughest guy. Every day I do something that I absolutely hate, that sucks. He runs ultra marathons. He hates running, but he knows he needs that mental toughness to apply to other places in life. And so that's the kind of like crazy we have to be, is that things we have to. That's the whole voluntary suffering of making our lives suck in different ways, not for the joy of that, but so that whenever these things come, we're mentally, physically, spiritually ready for them.
They call it mortification and fasting and that type of thing. And you kind of already hit upon it there with the spiritual toughness, the mental focus, and that. We're not trying to say, and we're all trusting God, that it's a type of quietism or a spiritual pacifism. We're not preaching that here at all. But with that clarity and that focus on God and that determination, that toughness, maybe that will move you to say, you know what, I think it's time we moved into the country. I don't want to move into the country. I've never farmed before. Okay. Maybe it's time we relocated somewhere. Maybe it's time I started prepping a little more. Maybe it's time I started going to Mass on a regular basis. Maybe it's time we started a family rosary. Whatever those things are, getting your head in the spiritual game, getting your heart in the spiritual game is where we're trying to say there's probably a good reason for that. And take this little lull, right now you got seeming a little lull in the storm, but sometimes that's the eye of the storm. And we kind of went through a bit of the hurricane in 2020. No job, no jab. And then we kind of are in a lull right now, and maybe things will be picking up again. Take the opportunity now, get your game on, and don't check out, but tune in.
And the biggest thing with that everyday grind is that you got to get your head, people got to get their head out. There's only one way. We're the body of Christ for a reason. Like, I am not called to do the same thing you're called to do. And the only way I'm going to know what that is by my spiritual life exponentially getting better, because if not, then I'm just going to follow whatever you're doing. Somebody that I trust, that I think knows what they're doing, I'm just going to follow what they're doing, and it might not necessarily be what the heck I'm supposed to do.
That's very true. And what you think somebody else is doing, maybe just a little punctuation point on here, it may not be the thing. That's what you perceive in them as one of the things there, and it's not exactly what you're following. You're supposed to be following Christ, His church, the guidance. He gave us all the sacraments. There's never been a time in any part of the history of mankind, well, after Christ, that they have not been killing someone specifically because they're Christian. Yeah. Never. So why should we be any different that we don't have some persecution in our lifetime, especially with killing 3,000 babies a day, the transgenderism, the kids. I mean, it would be hell if God didn't put a stop to it. And how does he put a stop to it? By getting people above all of that in doing exactly what you're talking about, giving us things that are going to suck in order to get. Why was it the greatest generation? They went through World War I, they went through the Great Depression, they went through World War II, and they're like, oh, that's the greatest depression. They did a lot of things that suck, and they manned up, and they didn't have a problem deciding what gender they were, and all these other minutiae, silly sidebar questions that we're just steeped in today.
And we shouldn't be looking to create some type of impenetrable Christendom that is devoid of any persecution at all, because actually something's wrong. Could be potentially something wrong is when that's happening, because the periods without persecution, here's the danger here, they can lull us into a sense of false security.
That's where we're at right now.
Into a sense of complacency. So it's almost like one of those tough love type of things that God does. I'm going to allow this persecution, just like you did with the people in the Old Testament. You're worshiping false gods right now. You know, generations ago they didn't do that, but you guys are doing it now. So I'm going to send in Assyria, Babylon, whoever. They're going to mix you up, and then you're going to come back to repentance.
I love the way you just described, like, essentially the wholesale, almost genocide of people as being mixed up. That's the thing.
Mixing it up.
There's one thing that I would want to say to people out there, because you've kind of touched on it, the notion of the quietism. And the danger of quietism, the danger of doing nothing. And I think there can be, sometimes it's a sense of, oh, the persecution is coming, so we need to be nothing but spiritually ready. I've got to be, and so all of my stuff is oriented towards being spiritually ready, and it's kind of practicing almost that Benedict option. It says, me and my house will be fine, I've kind of built it here, and I'm just going to pray and we're not doing anything. And I think there's a wonderful phrase, and I actually saw this like on some like silly Instagram post or something. Somebody had put it like...
All Instagram posts.
All Instagram posts are silly by the very nature of them, but this was particularly amusing. And it had actually put it over the picture of a Star Trek character, of all things. But it said, to quote the thing that you just quoted, talking about accepting the things I cannot change. And it said, I am done accepting the things I cannot change. I'm now going to start changing the things I cannot accept. And I think that as kind of obviously just, a little bit, switched around, but like Sphinx in Mystery Men, for those of you who remember the movie, it's a good movie, just switching around that. But there's a truth there, and it speaks against quietism. I am done with accepting, I'm done with not changing the things I cannot accept. That's it.
Yeah, if your spiritual life leads you to staying inside all day, then congratulations, you're either called to the monastery or you don't really have that much of a spiritual life.
Yeah, I think the viewer is well served today. Watch this video, share it with your family, take it to heart. I think we hit a lot of good points here, exactly what was needed. Not just this idea of putting more beans and my goodness, gold in your basement.
I love the feel of it.
But put the gold in your heart, get the grace, the wise virgins and the oil and all that. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus exules filii Eve, a te suspiramus gementes et flentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordis oculos, ad nos converte, et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende, o clemens, o pia, o dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen.
Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
Amen.
And thank you again for joining us. For The Download, we premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, God bless you.